Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our virtual Zahner series. As you may have noticed, I forgot to unmute myself, so if you can see and hear me, feel free to throw something out in the chat so we know that you are all good. And we'll give everybody just another moment to join us. Hello. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for joining us. We are starting our 2020 Zahner Conservation Lecture Series here at the Biological Foundation, and it looks very different from years past. You may notice the Nature Center behind me is sadly empty, and we really wish that you all could be here to join us in person, but we are making do with what we've got, and this year it's virtual offerings. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Paige Engelbrechtson, and I am the Nature Center Education Specialist here at the Foundation. Joining me is our panelist, Susan Cerulean, and also our Communications and Event Coordinator, Winter Gary. Winter is helping me co-moderate this webinar, so if you have questions or put things in chats, we'll get back to you as fast as we can. And together we are running our shortened Zahner series. I imagine most of you, like myself, have become familiar with Zoom since this all started. I will be honest, this is my first time running things on this side. So I apologize for any hiccups that we may experience along the way. If you see any difficulties or have any issues, again, put it in the chat and let us know, and we will do our best to fix them. So our Zoom Zahner Lecture Series, this is the first of 3, so they're shortened not only in number, but also in length. Our speakers will talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, maybe a bit more, and then we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A. For example, Susan is going to be discussing her book, and then I really hope we have an engaging discussion. I had a chance to see her at another Zoom event and absolutely loved what came out of that. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please put them in the Q&A, which is an option that you have in your Zoom webinar platform. And speaking of our speaker tonight, Susan Cerulean, for more than 3 decades, has been a writer, naturalist, and advocate who has kayaked, scalloped, fished, and counted birds on and around Dog, the St. George's, and St. Vincent Islands. In 2016, her book, Coming to Pass, Florida's Coastal Islands in a Gulf of Change, was awarded a gold medal for Florida nonfiction. Her nature memoir, Tracking Desire, A Journey After Swallow-Tailed Kites, was named an Editor's Choice title by Audubon magazine. She has co-edited 5 anthologies and written extensively in other publications about Florida. Cerulean designed the state of Florida's non-game and watchable wildlife programs before turning to a full-time writing and speaking career. As an activist, she has traveled from Standing Rock Reservation to Key West, encouraging citizens to understand the linkages between our human choices and our planet's loss of biodiversity and climate change. With her husband, award-winning professor and oceanographer Dr. Jeff Chanton, who you may remember came for a Zahner lecture last year, Cerulean divides her time between Indian Pass and Tallahassee, Florida. She is here tonight to talk to us about her just-released book entitled I Have Been Assigned the Single Bird, a daughter's memoir published this month by the University of Georgia Press. Her book is available at independent bookstores everywhere or wherever you buy your books. Susan, would you like to begin?
Sure. I really wish I was up there at your beautiful campus in Highlands, North Carolina right now. I think it's probably about 20 degrees cooler and maybe a little less humid, but here I am in hot and very humid Tallahassee, Florida. I'm imagining all of us in the auditorium of your nature center, which we can see a little bit of with the terrariums and the touch tanks and all the people who come to these lectures and love the natural world. I met some of you just about this time last year when Jeff was a Zahner lecturer, and I'm really grateful to be with you today. I especially thank Karen Patterson and Charlotte Muir and Paige and Winter for inviting me and working out the technological details of Zoom presentations, which we all know don't always go exactly as we hope. But I see other friends are here from Apalachicola, to Athens, Georgia, to Wakulla County, and it's just great to have everybody here. So what I'd like to do is take you just for a little while on a virtual field trip to my part of the world here on the Gulf Coast of Northwest Florida. And so you're going to have to really dig into your imagination, and we're going to do one of my favorite things, and maybe it's yours too. We're going to find a group of shorebirds that are resting in the sand, and from a safe distance, we're going to sit on the beach, and we're going to be really quiet and not disturb them, and we're going to watch the birds go about their lives. So imagine we are watching a flock that includes dozens of large orange-billed Caspian terns intermingled with black skimmers. The sand under their feet is compacted by hundreds of tern and pelican toes. And a group of royal terns are tending to their plumage off to themselves because they're a little bit more remote. And pairs of laughing gulls are mating even this late in the season, and a southborn beautiful wind is lifting their feathers. And in amongst all these little congregations, sanderlings and a few black-bellied plovers are stepping between the others. And then we get really lucky, and on the outskirts of the colony, we spy a single tiny little roving snowy plover chick. So they're just like itty bitty, but with long legs. So on its long spindled legs, the chick is investigating the beach all alone, and its voice is trilling a tiny stream of audible bubbles of sound. He resembles a little marshmallow Easter chick, except he's covered with gray and buff down instead of yellow sugar. He doesn't have a tail yet, no feathers at all, just a soft white, sort of a cowl on the back of his neck. And we watch him stop to scratch his chin with a naked black foot. We wonder if that tiny chick is scared when the black skimmers, who are the most scaredy of the group, fly up and circle when their sort of light background honking shifts to a louder, more urgent wah, wah, wah. And we wonder, what and how does the chick learn what to fear? It probably does not know, as we do, that it has hatched a highly endangered species into a highly endangered world. But the parent plover knows, and it flies back from the water's edge to drive away a gold-billed tern that has ventured too close to the chick, and it in real life is definitely a predator of these little snowy plover babies. As the adult plover skirmishes with the tern and drives it away, the chick takes refuge under a tiny little green dune plant. And when the adult returns, the chick makes a beeline to its parent and burrows into the feathers of its breast. Now you won't often see this, but there are some really nice pictures of it online, and I have seen it. The newly hatched plover chick came into its world, which is our world too, possessed of a bold life force. Plover chick, plover parent, every other creature out there on that beach by swelling Gulf waters do nothing but fully live out their purpose. And I want to rise up every morning and do the same. I bet you do too. That's what we're going to talk about now. I've spent my life watching and monitoring wild bird populations and also the habitats birds and other wildlife require to live. I've watched the numbers of birds drop precipitously over my lifetime, and the climate changed drastically as well. But I didn't know that the earth was afflicted by our species. It's very different for our young people today. But back when I was young, I didn't know that the earth was afflicted by our species until I was well into my 20s. All I wanted to do was submerge myself in the delight of it, and I did. The Atlantic Ocean, cold and dark and irresistible, piles of autumn leaves, scarlet, orange, cadmium yellow, canoe expeditions through the pitcher plant bogs of the Okefenokee Swamp, and jumping into the chill of Swanee River Springs. I took these wild places and the reliable turn of the seasons for granted. Excesses of winter simply meant a pair of snow days where I grew up in New Jersey, and summer, a brief wave of heat. There was no reason to imagine the seasons would ever lose their structure. The natural world was mine to dwell upon, and I did. As a side note, if you can grab a copy of the New York Times Magazine from 2 weeks ago, there are some gripping stories of what it's like to be young, growing up in the age of climate change, and it's very different than it was for me and my cohorts. As I watch and count the birds, I understand, as we all need to, that we are not only living in a period of climate change, but also of mass extinction. We've lost nearly 3 billion individual wild birds since 1970. And population loss isn't restricted to rare and threatened species like our snowy plover, but it includes many widespread and common species. Some have nosedived as much as 80%, including the northern bobwhite quail. And many, like evening grosbeaks, meadowlarks, and several kinds of duck, have lost 50 to 70% of their population in just 4 decades. So think about what these animals need to live. Shorebirds, like our little snowy plover, require beaches to nest. They nest right on the sand. And they are now squeezed by sea level rise and our human crowding and the predators that come with us, like cats. And I guess you can't blame the coyotes on people, but they are also a problem for plovers. And again, there's 50% or more fewer plovers than you would have seen 50 years ago. So I've been working on this, working as a conservationist and a writer and a wildlife biologist for all this time. And I tried lots of different approaches, as many of you do, giving programs, writing books and field guides, and taking people on field trips, giving PowerPoints now. And the thing is, it feels like it's not stemming the flow of the problems, right? I mean, don't you all feel that way sometimes too as conservationists? So it happened that about 9 years ago, my father, who I was very close to, and I loved just as much as I love those little snowy plover chicks, he was just as dear. He came down with a case of a variant of Alzheimer's. And it was a slow process. And in those years, which were about 10, his wife died. And so we moved my dad here to Tallahassee, where Jeff and I could take care of him and oversee what his needs were. And I'm sure that many of you have either known someone with dementia or cared for them yourselves. So I'm not telling you anything that probably most of you don't already have experience with. But I thought that maybe if I combined those two stories, taking care of my father and the shorebirds, that maybe I could find a way to appeal to more people, because not everybody relates to birds like us nature center kind of people. And anyway, I'm a writer. I was sitting with my dad a lot, and the stories just kind of presented themselves. So that's what the book is about. It kind of goes back and forth between the two stories. And there's a lot of love in it. It's not all gloom and doom, but it's kind of a way to look face on to what's presenting itself to us. I found that sitting with my dad when I wasn't needing to do something was kind of like sitting with those wild birds. To understand his needs, I had to be really still and be extremely observant because he couldn't always communicate what was going on for him and what he needed. So it was like a meditation practice. And so I alternated my life between being outside, doing the things that we love to do, being with Dad, and looking to see what I could find to write about right there in his room. Outside the window of his room, there was a small forest of trees. And as the 5 years moved on, I watched a stand of kudzu vine. You all know the southern kudzu vine, which in the time we were there, basically climbed and smothered that little stand of trees. And it occurred to me, watching that and watching Dad lose his faculties to the tangles and plaques of dementia, it became clear to me that that was the metaphor I needed, that humans are doing the very same thing to the earth, smothering it, bulldozing it, taking from it. And I thought, we can all relate to that. So the similarities between his illness and what's happening to the planet are these. The earth is the brain and the body into which we were born. In some nearly parallel way, we face not only a crisis of numbers of people diagnosed with dementia, about 6 million right now. And I wrote this even before the COVID virus was here. So that's a whole nother layer that we are just going to know exists, but not talk about so much tonight. As a culture, we're stricken with this disease. Not just individual people get it, but as a culture, we have a bad case of this disease. For why else would we knowingly destroy the planet that sustains our very lives? The word dementia, when I was younger, it carried a lot of gravitas, or like you never wanted to admit that somebody in your family had dementia. It just had this bad like connotation. But here's what the Latin root of that word. The first part of the word, demens, means madness or the irreversible deterioration of the intellectual properties of the brain. D, undoing, mens, the mind. That's dementia. And so the people that are afflicted with this disease are suffering from the same paradigm of perpetual growth, like the kudzu, like our economic machine, the smothering and overexploitation of the person's brain cells. In human dementia, the losses we see, dancing, laughing, smiling, problem solving, memory, imagination, and eventually breathing are all stolen from the individual. But the dementia affecting our culture is the belief that humans can take and consume whatever we like, just like the kudzu, from the body of the planet. And this is different from the individual affliction. At the core, so I've just been thinking about this a lot, and to my mind, at the core of this cultural dementia is the tragedy that we have forgotten or failed to honor our true inseparability from nature. We tend to think about the earth as just the environment around us. And so we experience ourselves and our planet and our birds and our everything, rivers, as separate entities. Some of us may see the planet only in terms of what it can do for us. We need to recognize that the planet and the people on it are ultimately one and the same. And we can, because our bodies are constructed of the dust of the stars, the same small particles that make up a bird this time may be you next time, may be the Sop-Choppy River next time, may be the sand on the beach by the Plover next time. And we carry the memory in our bodies of a time when our lives were always with the birds out under the spread of the sky, a time when we lived without separation. My father was dearly beloved by his family, but after all, he was a single being with a certain fate that we will all ultimately share. But Earth's biodiversity, to me, that's a whole different thing. Populations, species, ecosystems, the climate, these we must and can protect. Would we knowingly let wild birds go extinct? Would we knowingly leave our climate climbing like it is to our children? I don't think that we would if we understood the repercussions of our actions. I don't think we would. But we live in a time when the rights of humans and corporations are allowed to supersede the rights of nature, and this is what must change. Transforming these assumptions, our worldview, our cosmology of separation, our economies, that is the title of my book to me, The Single Bird That We Must Heal. I've been just clinging to the words of Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Richard Powers, who lives up not far from you all in Highlands, in Townsend, Tennessee. And he wrote, if you haven't read the Overstory, you must, but I bet you have. And I probably underlined something on every page of that book, but here's something that struck me in particular. We are living at a time when claims are being made for a moral authority that lies beyond the human. That gives me a lot of hope. We are living at a time when claims are being made for a moral authority that lies beyond the human. I'm thinking about Ecuador, where they have the rights of nature established now in their constitution. I'm thinking about the Santa Fe River in Central Florida, where our friend John Moran and others are working to establish the rights of the river so that the Nestle Corporation can't just withdraw whatever it wants to from those beautiful springs. That to me is the direction we need to be headed. And I think if we can make this shift, maybe we can redeem our species. Maybe our grandbabies will have a good planet to live on. The derangement of our time is rooted in how we live. That's the difference between my father's illness and the illness of the earth. And it follows to some extent, we can mitigate what has already been done. The thing is, there is no question that we are each called into service, and what form our service, our engagement takes will be diverse. Many forms of service. That's how nature operates. And together, there is an immense power within us. But the work has to start now, and it has to be swift. We are on our own, but we are billions. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I wish I could see your faces.
Well, Susan, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And I have to admit, I would love to kick us off with a question, because you were talking about how your childhood is very different from the childhood of somebody growing up now. And I think immediately of Greta Thunberg and the other young activists who are recognizing the decline in our environment and fighting tooth and nail with what they have to raise awareness and take action. How do you see that playing a role in our cultural dementia and you know, your father at the end of his life and the world declining versus these children who are growing up in a world they know is not going to look the same for much longer?
Well, I think that those young women, largely, but also young men, are leaders out of this. They really are. I listen to Greta Thunberg, but I also listen to Jane Fonda's Fire Drill Fridays. I don't know if any of you all know about that, but she brings on activists from all over the world who are full of hope and love and desire to make a better life. And so that's the opposite of dementia, right? So what that is acting as if these two things we've been talking about, species extinction and climate change, are crises. They're not just one of so many different things we have to address, although it's true, we have so many things to address. But they are acting and leading in their lives as if they understand the truth, which they do, which is that we are in a crisis. And you don't see that in your leadership locally or in our state, nationally. You don't see that. In fact, you see regulations being undone. And I was thinking about this a couple days ago when I was driving on the street near where I live, and there's this beautiful forest, and you see there was a sign that said self-storage coming soon. I think that's what it says. And I thought, wow, we drive past this kind of thing, and we don't go out there and grab the trees and say, no, there's enough self-storage units. This is storing a place for the birds to live and the squirrels, and for the carbon to be sequestered and to absorb the rainfall. That's dementia. What Greta are doing, and there's another young woman that was in the New York Times Magazine that I told you about, Jamie Margolin. And when you read about these people and how they spend their days, I mean, I really don't know why we aren't all out there all the time. But as I look at the names of the people that are with us today, many, many people are, and they're all taking a different piece of it. It's just that we have to get so much bigger in our activism and in our outreach. And at the same time, address poverty, address structural racism, address changing the economy, and address the virus. But you have to pick the way you're going to go. And for me, it starts with the love of the birds and the love of a place and the love of my family. And then just doing the best I can to take care and to share those stories. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes, it does. And I think it plays into one of the questions we have here, which is from Karen Patterson, who is saying, the mindset of our government and others seems to be that the solution to the Earth's problem is moving to Mars. So how do we combat that non-solution?
Well, all I can say is I wish I was having dinner with Karen Patterson tonight, because that's what I should be doing. That is not a solution. There's going to be very few of us that can go to Mars, and we're spending a huge amount of resources on it. I think that if some people want to spend their private money to do that, have at it. But it's not a solution for the 7 billion of us on the planet. And it really does take a lot of resources that should be being plugged in right now to all the other needs that we've got. And that's just how I look at it.
So we are getting more questions now. Thank you for answering that. Vince Lamb is asking about your writing style, and how do you think your writing was influenced by Terry Tempest Williams? He enjoys both of your works, and I have to admit, I have not heard of Terry Tempest Williams. Oh,
you need to go ahead and go out and get that along with the Overstory. She was one of my very first teachers, Vince. When I was writing about swallowtail kites in the 90s, I heard her speaking on, like NPR, and I just couldn't believe that someone could meld private, not private, but personal stories that some might consider private with issues of atomic bombing that affected her family, with cancer, and with her own life as an interpretive naturalist. And so she was teaching a workshop in Missoula, Montana, and I applied for it. I sent in my first chapter about swallowtail kites roosting down by Lake Okeechobee, as they're doing right now, or maybe finishing up. And she basically said to us, the personal is political. You have got to you have to unpack your stories, the stories of the people you came from, the stories of the land where you live, and that's just the way she does it. And now she teaches at Harvard Divinity School, and she's just an amazing thought leader and somebody that you can follow on Instagram page, and every day you will be inspired by the things that she puts up there. She lives in the Utah desert near Moab, and I guess she'll be teaching online this year. But yeah, I have definitely learned from her for a long, long time, and was lucky enough that she blurred my book this time.
That's fantastic. And I think, as you're saying, tying the story of your father's dementia into the story of our cultural dementia is definitely taking the political and making it personal. We have a question here from Crystal Wakoa, she's commenting that cultural dementia denies interdependency, and that we need to awaken the memory of non-separation in our bodies. And many of us find this easy, or at least pleasurable. How can this happen on a large scale with so many living in ways that are divorced from the natural world?
Wow, that, Crystal, we know that's the way to live, and it's a very hard. I think about that because the way that I get renewed and the way I find my center is by being immersed in places around here, rivers, sinks, the Gulf of Mexico, and in situations where I can watch what undisturbed wild things are doing, and then understand that I belong there. But how do we do that with 7 billion people? When you see a picture of Hong Kong or New York, or when I go to LA and see my grandchild, that is cause for a consternation and a little bit of despair, because I don't know how we're going to do it. I really don't know the answer to that. And I would love it if Crystal would type in the answer.
I have to admit, my personal solution is to take every child outside and get them in creeks and streams. And as an educator,
that's what you're doing right there at the Highlands Biological Station. That is such important work that you do.
Thank you. I do want to note we are at our half-an-hour mark, but we still have more questions coming in that I would love to continue talking with. So we're going to keep rolling if you'd like to continue staying with us. But if you are going to head out, because we are at that half-an-hour mark, please know we are going to be back here next week at 6 with Jason Love, our Associate Director, talking about microplastics, tying into that human impact on the world. So
don't feel bad if you have to go. I'm glad you came.
Hear, hear. Kind of tying into the lifestyles question, Karen is commenting that our lifespan makes it hard for people to appreciate the time frame of the planet. And how would you kind of respond to that, and how it ties into our forgetfulness, our harmful that we've done?
Well, I think that with climate change, there are now stories being told I personally think that my husband Jeff does the best interpretation of the long span of time and the very tiny little bit of that we're living in right now and our impact. But I think if that really what you need to do is get a little bit of sense of geologic time and look for stories. One place that I did an internship with is called Genesis Farm in Blairstown, New Jersey. Excuse me. And their mentor was a monk named Thomas Berry, and his last name is spelled Berry. And I think that if you wanted to do a little bit of reading, he wrote some books. One is called The Dream of the Earth, and you'll have to look online and see the names of other stories, other books that he wrote. But he writes, and the people at Genesis Farm write in such a way that you get exactly what that person, what your questioner was talking about, the sense of, maybe the atoms within us have been here for millions of years and billions of years. But we ourselves are just a tiny little recent drop in that whole big cauldron of rock and life that's our planet. And so there are lots of stories now. We could put Jeff on for a minute and he could do it, but he says no. I think that's essential. I had no idea. I also had no idea when I started learning all this in the late 90s that there were corporations who were suppressing what was already known about climate change way back maybe in the 70s at least. Oh, I'll tell you another person to follow that's really, really good. And that is his name is Bill McKibben. Have you heard of Bill McKibben? He writes a column called Annals of a Warming Planet. And it's very accessible. And it's in the New Yorker magazine twice a month. And he has an activist group called 350.org, which he has just recently turned over the leadership to young people. It's really appropriate that we do that, because you can even tell from my talk, I'm still nostalgic for when I was young and when we didn't know that these problems were looming. But you guys, and you two, Winter and Paige, are standing in for the young people that have to carry this forward. And you are, just simply by the jobs you're doing. But the story, the big geological story, I'm glad that, can't remember who brought that up, but I'm glad she did.
Yes, that was Karen asking about the time frame of the planet. Okay. And I do want to, kind of following up, two questions that are very related, multiple questions now. These are really good, guys. Thinking about the generations that are coming up now and having to make decisions. Patricia Cantrell is asking to truly contribute to combating the environmental dementia that is damaging our planet. Don't we need to check our wants and desires and be willing to make sacrifices? Something that she's pointed out that's very appropriate for Highlands is like not building the second home or loving a place to death.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And about 20 years ago, a group of us in Tallahassee started a group called The Heart of the Earth. And it's the idea was to, if you weren't from a place, say you aren't from Highlands, to really learn who the earliest people, the ecosystem, the species that were there before you, long before you, and understand the place where you live. I think that's a really important first step. We also back then asked people to sign a pledge that they would reduce their fossil fuel consumption by 30%. And that's the individual action that you're talking about, Patricia. the thing is, when you listen to the climate science right now and the the extinction crisis information, everything's coming at us so fast that it would be great if lots of us do that. And we are, and we should, but there's going to have to be structural changes on such a broad level, and not the softening of regulations that protect wild places that we've been seeing. We've lost some ground, and so both need to happen, but we can't only do the individual actions. Some of us, that's all we can do. But for those of us who have the time and attention and resource, we've got to think much bigger. And when you look at what happened this summer with Black Lives Matters, with that movement, we need that kind of movement as well for climate and for all of the environmental issues that face the planet. You know, that number of bodies, I think it's going to take that. And I'm not sure where it's going to come from, although Greta Thunberg sure has made a wonderful step out in that direction. You know, one of the ways she's combined her if you've been following her, that her personal life and her what she says matches how she lives. So I bet a lot of you followed her trip to North America. I think it was last summer. She posted from the sailboat that she took, because she will not fly. She will not use that fossil fuel. And she's a person, and we know others. The people at Genesis Farm, my friend Janice Ray has not flown in decades and won't. So making these personal stands is really important, but we also have to think really big, fast.
And that ties really well into our next question about kind of structural change from Bob Hogan, that he has just finished reading Blowout by Rachel Maddow about how the oil industry is as spawn of the devil, of people for whom the lust for riches creates a kind of other illness metaphor, and autism not towards not only the natural world, but our own species. Are there any examples of corporate responsibility from the oil and gas industry that would suggest they can be part of the solution?
I don't know the answer to that question, but on Jane Fonda's Fire Drill Friday a couple weeks ago, she said, we have to, it's the same kind of general tack. We have to insist on a divorce between our government and fossil fuels. We have to demand a managed phase out of all extraction. But the thing is that, of course, these extremely large companies don't want to do that. So I have not read Blowout by Rachel Maddow. We're at the point in the conversation where I wish it was more of a discussion, because I don't have the answer to that, but I'm definitely writing down Blowout on my list. And I also think that Bill McKibben has a lot to say on this topic, very specifically. He'll every 2 weeks, and you can go back and look at his posts from the last 6 months, and he'll have the good news of what's happening as far as that, keeping it in the ground and divesting from fossil fuels in corporate portfolios and personal portfolios. But he's also very clear, like he said, see if I can find this quote. He said that basically, we're living, well, I can't put my hand right on it, but we're basically living at a level of CO2 and in the atmosphere, and the temperatures and sea level rise that are going to catch up to it, that our species and related primates have never lived in before. So when you put that information together with the big cities, like we think about Miami, we think about New Orleans back down in the South, how is that managed or unmanaged retreat going to happen? You know, that's not the question he was asking, though. And I think the best thing to do with this is to educate ourselves and go see what Rachel Maddow has to say in Blowout, because I probably can't give you the answer to that. I just know it needs to be.
That's fair, and I know part of the strength of this is that there are so many people working on it. We have a couple of more questions. Probably just one from Vivian Brewer, who says, seems to me that part of the problem in terms of raising the younger generation's awareness is twofold. Children are so absorbed with their indoor tech toys and social media that they have so much less exposure and experience with nature. Also, for safety reasons, today's children do not have the freedom to get on their bikes and go out on their own, or go into the woods and build forts the way we did as children. Do you feel this is a problem in getting the younger generation to care?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's a whole literature about this idea of Richard Louv is the guy who wrote about Last Child in the Woods and that sort of thing. But I notice I have a grandchild who's only 18 months old, and last time I saw him in LA, and I still could go there, he had a natural affinity, even though he lives in the city, for trees. So I would take him to a very urban park and put his hands on this tree, and he'd go, whoa, you know, and just a teeny little guy. And I think that while what the question says is true, that's something that we all can do something about. We all can definitely take children out that we're related to or we aren't. And we're just bringing up the natural affinity that comes with being human, that comes with being not separate from the earth. And I don't know, I'm giving you a lot of resources, but I'm always reading what people have to say. And as somebody that has really informed my thinking a lot is Joanna Macy, and Macy. She has some wonderful podcasts on being, and just all on her own website. And she's a Buddhist practitioner, and she says two things. She's very even though she's, I think, 90 now, she's very hopeful that we can see a great turning happen, and it would be in our children. And she says that it's important to work not just fueled by urgency or fear or despair, but by what we love on this planet. And she says we must burn with love in a world we just can't completely fix. And boy, that's a hard tightrope to walk, don't you think, all of you? I mean, it really is. But the only way for me to do that is that, and this goes back to an earlier point, is to get out there and just be in the place. But for the urban children, like some of our grandchildren, you know, that one tree or grass in the pavement, that's what they've got to work with, and we need to make sure that they get to be with it, even if it's just that. So maybe that's a good place to wrap it up.
I agree. I was just trying to find that, you know, I should know it like the back of my hand, but in the end, we will only conserve what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. Baba Diyam. So I know I could talk about kids in nature all day, but we're not here to talk to me. We are here to talk to you. So Susan, thank you so much for speaking to us and joining us. And for everybody who's still here, thank you so much. If you'd like to support the foundation, which is putting on these lectures, you can become a member or make a donation on our website, We definitely appreciate your support, especially in these unusual times. You can find Susan's book at any independent bookstore, as well as the University of Georgia Press. And next week, as I mentioned, our speaker will be the station's own Associate Director, Jason Love, talking about microplastics. So check out our website for more information and the link to register. Hopefully it'll go a little bit smoother than today, and I will remember to unmute myself. Finally, next Tuesday, we're kicking off. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's a slightly nerve-wracking experience, so thank you, Susan.
You're right.
Something that I'm a little bit better practiced at are videos and tours. And so if you guys are interested, please join us this coming Tuesday for our first off-season Nature 101. At 1 p.m. we'll be premiering another video where I talk about trees and leaves. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you again, Susan. Everybody give her a virtual round of applause, please.
It's great to be with you.
We're very glad to have you, and hopefully you'll be able to come up here when there's not a pandemic.
That would be great. I'd love to.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Bye.